Hello, everyone. Now we come to the moment everybody's been waiting for, the main act. Peter, it's fantastic to have you here. It's been a great experience to chat to you the other day, and I'm really excited to be sharing your journey and your successes and your learnings with the rest of the community. Now, let us start back at 1979. You're 24 years old, and you start this business, Salmat. Can you share with us a little bit about what you knew then when you started this business, and what was the spark that really started this journey?
Well, we didn't know much. My business partner, Phil, and I went to school together from the age of 7. And when we left school, we said we'd start a business. And we thought we'd go into real estate. We somehow ended up in fashion, which, if you look at me, you realise that's probably not a high point. And then Phil's dad was involved with sampling for Colgate and Rexona. He said, this is a pretty good business. He was working for someone. And we had a look at it, couldn't really see something, but they just started to do catalogues for retailers. And we had a chat and realised that all the catalogues were in the newspapers and they weren't targeted and they were restricted to the circulation of the newspaper, and they didn't have any segmentation, they didn't have multi-versions, they didn't have different product placements. So we thought we could change that view. So at that stage, a major retailer like Coles or Woolies was doing about 4 catalogues a year. And we went to them with a proposal, and it wasn't as simple as that, because first year was 33,000, then 500, then 1.2, 2.2, 5.7, 12.8, 22.1, 50.3, 85.6, 135.7. So there's a few issues in the middle of that in terms of cash flow and people and expansion. But we were improving the customer's business. We're letting Coles and Woolies and all the other retailers distribute catalogues to the segments of the market that wanted to buy their products. We allow them to do a different price point in Darwin, or in a good one is Villawood. If you'd got a Coles catalogue in Villawood and one in Mossman, the buy was $50 less for the same goods in Villawood as it was in Mossman. And that was part of the segmentation modelling. So once we started on this journey, I'll talk about cash flow issues because everyone has that. There's whole bits that come into it. There's the culture of the company, how you attract the right people. There's the growth, how do you fund it? How do you expand into state? How do you expand into to other countries? We ended up with 9,000 people in 8 countries. Might have been 10, but somewhere in there. So how do you do that and not fall over? Well, we fell over a couple of times. But, typically we did all the normal stuff. We speak to customers and cut their debtor days from 60 to 14. People said you couldn't do it, but Coles and Woolies paid us within 14 days. And then we ran out of puff. But all the way along, we were improving the business, we were improving their business. And they just keep coming to us with, we tell them, what's causing noise in your business? What's making it hard for you to do things? And they'd say, oh, well, we can't mail stuff out. We can do catalogues, but we can't mail them out. We can put them through the distribution network. So we started a mailing division where we mailed catalogues, and that quickly morphed into direct mail, and that morphed into statements and for banks, for the government. So by the time we finished that little run, we were supplying Australia Post with 70% of their mail. And that led into a whole thing about data, because everyone thinks a bank's got a name in there, your name in there, and there's a little code there with all your details on it, which comes in your bank statement. But someone like the Commonwealth Bank has 270 different silos of information. The only time it comes together is when the statement's produced. So in '84, we're sort of jumping from 22 to 35 or 36. Now, it doesn't mean much, but $15 million extra sale at 60 days credit means an extra $2 million of cash just to operate. So we had a meeting and we realised we needed to find someone. We found Herald Weekly Times, Adelaide Advertiser and Queensland newspapers, and we sold them 15% each. So they roughly had 48%. In 86, Rupert Murdoch bought them all. It was good and bad. It was good in that we had his grunt. And that's important because major customers won't talk to you unless you've got a bit of grunt, particularly when you're growing for things. But it was bad in that Ken Cowley and Rupert told me that they wouldn't give us $1 of business unless we sold them the 2%. They gave us 2 great board directors. We got on really well with them. I don't want to paint this as a nasty thing about Rupert or anything. We were just doing business. And they were on our board for 13 years. They were great blokes. So in that middle time, we sort of had expanded in New Zealand, Philippines, Taiwan, Hong Kong. We'd won Citibank's work throughout Asia. But having 2 senior board members on from News was great for us, even though they didn't give us Foxtel or any of the good stuff. But it paid off in the end. So in 98, Rupert said to Lachlan, I'm going to put you in charge. And Lachlan said, well, I'm going to sell anything that we don't control or more than 50% of, or it's not essential. So I rang Ken Cowley and said, hey, Ken, where do we fit? And he said, you don't. What do you want to do? And I said, well, we'd like to buy you out. We don't have any money, but... And he said, okay, let me talk to Rupert. So he spoke to Rupert. Rupert came back and said, yeah, okay. They got Macquarie or one of those in to come and value the business. I think enterprise value then was about 90 million, somewhere in that number, and they had 49%. So we went to all the banks, all Macquarie's, and they all wanted too much or didn't want to give us the money. So I said to Ken, we had another meeting, and I said to Ken, hey Ken, would Rupert fund it? And he said, I don't know. I said, okay, I'll ask him. What are you thinking? I said, well, we can pay you off over 5 years, and we'll pay you, BSB plus 2% or something, some. And he came back and said yes. So we got the money, we sold some of the properties we'd bought for the factories, and Rupert's comment was, I'm happy to do it because despite us having 49% and never giving them $1 business, they've always treated us fairly, never dudded us, and they've been really helpful. So that's where relationships come in. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it's up to you to make it work. So, and then we floated in 2002. So disruption of cash flow is shocking because it puts pressure. I went home to Pam one night and said, I don't think we're going to keep the house. We'll keep the business, but she wasn't overly impressed with that, but anyway. But, no matter who's here, you've all got businesses, we've all got these issues. The thing I would say to you is that just say to yourself, there's always a way. You may not like it, but there's always a way to make your business better and to survive. So we always went with the view, if we solve a customer's problem, we'll get more business. And first thing is make them your friend, and then don't talk about price. Talk about what problems they've got. And I'll try and give you a couple, I'm trying not to make this too long, a couple of instances. So we were doing the statement processing for the Commonwealth Bank. I said, what's the biggest issue? And they said, the biggest issue is microfiche, which is the storing of the statements. It was like an X-ray, right? So I went back to our team and said, how can we do this? And they said, we could probably build a digital archive. So, so I went back to the bank, said, we think we could build a digital archive. They said, okay, you've got to pay for it. These are the rules. You've got to have 2 years sub 20 seconds, 7 years sub 2 minutes. So we built the archive, and we've now got, I've sold that business, but before I sold it, we had every bank, and we had archived statements back to 1928, sub 2 second recovery on our service. But what it did was, where was the bank going to go with their statement processing when we were going to do the archive of the same data? We effectively had locked them in by giving them IP. That's the next thing. Try and build some IP that makes you different from your opposition. Don't try and compete with them, try to lead. and this is where culture comes in. You've got to build a can-do culture, but when things go wrong, I don't really care about the blame. All I care about is how do we get out of this and how do we make it better. And it doesn't matter what business you're in, if you don't treat your staff right and you don't give them you don't tell them where the destination is. Like if I said to everyone here, go to Sydney Airport, you'd all go different ways, but you'd get to Sydney Airport. But you knew where the destination was. So a lot of people say, I'm not going to tell the staff about this and that because, it's private. You're having yourself on. Tell the staff what's going on. Tell them where the destination is and let them do it. They'll get you there. They'll grow your business without you having to micromanage it. Spend time on the business, not in it.
Peter, fantastic.
I went a bit far.
No, it was amazing. Like, it was a great journey. I mean, you've talked about when you started at $33,000 in the first year and scaled massively. And there's so many elements in there around culture, around customer centricity. I just want to explore them a little bit more. So tell us a bit the early days, going from 33,000 to 12.5 million in 5 years. Now, that's the first piece of the puzzle. Were there one or two levers that really helped you grow that fast in the early journey? And I'll come back to the other pieces a little bit later as well.
So the early lever for us was actually designing the catalogue distribution areas to match the census data. So we could supply demographic and socioeconomic information on where the catalogues were going. And we did everything from circles of quality. The distance from a shopping centre is a reflection of how many people will go in. So, and quite often it might look like the shopping centre's next door, but there's a highway through the middle of it, they're not crossing the road. So the first thing was to not only to compute, to build a software system to manage 35,000 walkers, and then a software system that allowed us to give the customer advice about where his catalogue. And that just sort of boomed because the more they did, I can remember Paul Simon, who was in charge of Woolies, one of the big agencies went, you've got to dump these catalogues. And he said, I'll dump these catalogues when I don't see that sale line going through the roof every Monday. And so that was the thing that kind of got us there.
Yeah, just knowing the information, the data behind it. Now, look, you talked a little bit about once you got to that 12.5 million, in 1984, you had some cash flow issues, and that, I don't think I could go and tell my partner that, we're going to mortgage the house. But how did you come through that phase? And what are some, obviously, it's funny, but I'm sure it's very challenging. And being many small business owners here, everybody faces cash flow issues. So what are something you've done to, combat that?
Listen, it was horrific. We are doubling and we don't have the cash and you're sort of wondering how to pay the salary next week, but we know the business is strong. And we did lots of little stuff like speaking to the customers about paying us quicker. We went to the bank, and we should talk about banks a bit because banks aren't there to supply working capital. They'll lend you money, but they're not there to supply working capital. So we had a $900,000 overdraft with the old CBC bank, and we went to see them, and new manager there, and he said, well, I don't like the business and I don't like you. It's true. And then he said, by next Friday I'm cutting your overdraft in half, and within a month I want you out of the place.
Wow.
So, I've got people relying on us. So we walked out the door, and Phil, my business partner, who's the greatest salesman on earth, let me tell you. He said, what are we going to do? I said, see that bank over there? We're going to walk in there and pitch, which was a CommBank. So he walked over and we went in and saw this bloke, and we laid him out, laid out all the stuff and said, mate, this is where it's at. He said, I got plenty of money, I'll back you. Now that only lasts for a period. And then it comes down, you can go to friends or, you can go and get... So there was no private equity around then. And that's when we realised we had to sell some equity to get the money to grow the business. It had a double effect in that when we went into a bank, they'd say, who are you? And we said, oh, well, this and this, and News Limited owned 49%, and that was sort of got us through the door because they go, oh, well, News Limited owns 45%, can't be too bad. So they're the sort of, you've got to make that decision. It's no use making it when you're broke. You've got to make it before it happens. It's a bit like when you sell your business. You've got to make it when you need to.
Fabulous. Look, I caught up with you earlier last week, and one of the key things that I took away is when you talked about knowing your customer and solving your customer problems. And you have this great ethos around customer centricity, around, customers first, order second. So tell us a bit more about this focus on customer centricity and how that flows through Salmat, the entire organization, because obviously you have the focus, but 9,000 other people have got to be doing the job. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so it is so important that your customers are your friends, that you know them well, and that you understand what problems they've got. Because if you can solve their problems, then they're going to stick with you through thick and thin. So we always had the view that, one of the things is, if you go into a meeting with a customer and he drinks his cup of water or tea before you do, you've spoken too much. So go in there and ask him how you can help him, what's causing him problems, and then work out a way to do it. And just keep that customer focus from the warehouse salesman through to the warehouse manager, and people through to the salesman, that they understand that the customer is important. And honestly, this is not hard stuff. This is really simple. Focus on the customer. And I'll give you another good instance. I was talking to a mate of mine, and he's a dentist. And I said, what's the biggest issue? And he said, my biggest issue is cancellation. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, about 30% of people cancel because they've got, a kid from school or something. I said, oh, right. So I went back and got the team and said, how can we fix this? So we built a thing called MessageNet, which is when you get a text from your hairdresser or your physio, that's our software. It's on every practice management software in the country. Do you think they're ever going to go anywhere else? No. So just by listening to customers, you can find solutions for them. But most people don't want to do that. They want to give them the service, get the money and move on. And, it's really important that you go that technology journey. So we started, like pretty dumb in junk mail. We ended up doing voice recognition for the New Zealand government. We did London Taxi Company voice recognition. We did... So the customer will take you on the journey. You just got to listen. It's not hard.
That's fantastic. I mean, obviously, one of the great things about Salmat is you've kept on reinventing yourself. And I remember you mentioned that you got out of businesses at the right time as well as reinventing and moving into the next business. How do you create that innovation within your organization or within your leadership team?
Well, you've got to get your key team in the room and be pretty honest about where you want to take it. And I'll jump to post-Salmat. So we got into pubs and it was a disaster. So my business partner's Phil's brother wanted to be a publican, and I'd known him since he was 8. He was a dental mechanic, and we bought a pub up in Murwillumbah and another one in Coolangatta, and then we found out that he and his wife were both alcoholics, and that the manager he put on had disconnected one of the tills and was taking all the money that arrived in that till. So I said to Phil said, oh, we should get out of this. I said, mate, we'll get out of this. We're going to rip up $10 million. So let's find out how to run them. So we found out how to run them. And by applying the same principles about making our customers happy, whether it's someone dining there or kids' playgrounds or everything, we take a pub like we took the Kingscliff Hotel. It was turning over about $45,000. It does about $400,000 a week now, and it makes a fortune. So now we did the pub up. Don't get me wrong. We spent about $8 million on it, but we also created an environment where people wanted to come for dinner. They wanted to, have a few beers. Like kids could play. So look after the customer.
Yeah. Oh, everything goes back to that, isn't it?
Everything goes
Look after
back
the
to that.
customer. Fantastic. Look, we have a member, David Webster, in Melbourne, and he was very excited to hear that you were presenting today. And in fact, he wanted to be here but couldn't due to some work commitments. But he has actually submitted a question, which I'm going to ask you. He says, Peter, you've been leading successful businesses for the best part of 50 years. Can you describe your leadership style to us, and has it evolved with time and experience?
So I should say, I should come clean. David worked with me for 30 years, so this
50 years.
is an absolute setup question.
I thought he was going to give me more gossip than this question.
And whilst we're on the subject, Jamie's my nephew, so let's it all out now.
Yeah.
So I think my leadership style is cooperative, let the team know, but once we've made a decision, when we walk out that door, there's no one should be able to say, I disagree with it. Like, once you've made the decision, we're on song. So I'd say team orientated, good culture is really important, whether it's someone behind the bar or someone working in the factory. And actually that thing about respect for staff is really important. I mean, even the, I have an office in Macquarie Street in Sydney, and my son was working at Macquarie Bank, and they're self-entitled people. And so his mother was very keen for him to work with me, and I was not that keen. Anyway, he started to come, and I wasn't that keen because I don't like him. I was that keen. I said, Pam, if this goes poorly, he'll still love you, but he won't love me. So then we walked in. I parked in the car park. He said, Dad, why is your car always at the top, next to the office, ready to go? And I said, well, because I know the guy's name and his kids, and I have a chat to him in the morning, and he likes it. And I said, that's all you got to do. Engage with your staff and your people. So now David does that. So we should talk a little bit about getting out. So if we go back to 2012, if you think about bank statements, we were producing 4 billion letters a year. And I went to the board and said, this is going to be dead in 10 years. I was making 60 million, making 83 EBITDA. It's good business. And they said, oh, and that included, there's some bits we carved out of it when we sold it, but that was the basic business. And they said, oh, such a great business. And I said, emails 1 cent, a mail pack's $1. This is not hard to work out. So we sold it to Fuji Films for 375 million. And then come forward 10 years, who gets mail? Much. Put your hands up if you get mail. No, you should. So knowing where your business is going and what its life point is really important. But once you make the decision, then use professional people to put the presentation together and go out to the marketplace, because it's not just Joe down the road who wants to buy it, because Australia Post wanted to buy our business and they were really happy to offer us about 200 million until we went to market. So knowing when to get out and is so important. And you know, with me, I'm 74, so not young. Getting out and realising that is really important, because there was no one in the family that could. We had one that could have run it, but he didn't want to. But out of the two families, there was nobody else. So in 2019, I sold basically the rest of 20. Went through to 20.
Jamie, you just missed out on the opportunity. I tell Jamie.
Wrong family, Jamie.
I tell Jamie in the office all the time, because obviously your experience and background, and his dad John Mattick, who's a great caliber scientist, and talks about, and he's done a talk for us, and he talks about genetics and DNA. So I keep telling him, look at your gene pool, Jamie. He's destined for greatness. So look, Peter, one last question, and then I'll open up to the room. You work at Matsal now. You do a lot of investing, but also involved in philanthropy. Yes. Looking forward, what do you think that you would like to have as your legacy, or what would you like to do going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm a great believer in working in charitable enterprises. So I guess the thing I'm most proud of, and aside from my wife and family, is I set up a scholarship scheme at Uni New South Wales for disadvantaged kids. And this is not kids that have necessarily got physical disadvantages. It's people that come from poorer backgrounds who have the ability to get there. And then, so we've got to go back to 2006-7 when I started this process. And David Gonski wasn't very pleased. He said, we only take in here the best and the brightest. And I said, well, you wouldn't have a clue who they are. He said, what do you mean? I said, because if you go to Blacktown High or Mudgee High, your school gets ranked. So maybe the best mark from that school is 91. The kid could be 100.
Yeah.
And so we started a program. They wanted me to give me money for a building, and I said, I don't do buildings. And then about 2014, it started to get a wriggle on. So the program was, I put enough money in to fund the students. So for each student, I put 150 grand in. They invest that money. They give the student 10 grand a year, and the 140 grand gets repeated, so it's a perpetual scholarship. So in 2018, I think it was, David rang me up and said, you're right. And I said, what am I right about? And he said, I hate to say this, but you're right about the students and the scholarships. So we met and we decided to build a scholarship program for we call them equity scholarships. And then we had a wider view about scholarships within the university. So I've got about 40 scholars now who are on my scholarships. And they've all gone on to have, the ones that have left, you know, they're actuaries and they earn great money and they help each other. We have an annual dinner. I give them mentoring. But the other side of it was that the university took this on board, and our target was to get 25% of the students at Uni New South Wales on scholarship, whether that was an equity scholarship or a scholarship from BHP, but on scholarship. So this year we got to 23.7% of kids on scholarship. So I'm happy to keep that running. So I don't really care about the money or the family. I've got enough money in my life. What I care about is, you know, what we could do for the disadvantaged. I've been on chair of for the Shep Centre for Profoundly Deaf Kids. I think we should all be doing some charity work in private business. It's as good as network as you get, but it also, you will feel good about it.
Fantastic. It's an amazing journey, and thank you for sharing all those insights with us. On that note, I'm going to open it up to the room. Do I have any questions from the room? Might kick off with...
Don't be bashful.
There you go. Hold on 1 second. I'll give you this.
Where'd the microfilm go?
When Fuji bought you out, did you hold all the microfilm from the banks?
No, we converted to digital,
And you
so
destroyed
microfilms are gone.
Destroyed it all?
Yeah.
No archiving or anything like that?
No, we're back to 1928 on computer now. All searchable. But no, microfiche no longer exists. They used to charge, have a listen to this. We were charging them 1.7 cents to pull down a statement, and they were charging the customers $15. Yeah, I am in the wrong business.
If anyone wants to ask a question, just give us a little...
Don't make me go down that end.
Peter, what's the funniest business story you've got?
No, there's... listen, there are so many.
Just something though.
Okay, I'll give you one about myself. So we had this massive meeting booked with News Limited and a whole bunch of people, and I was living on an acreage at Dural, and so I thought I'd creep out early morning and get into work and go to the meeting. And I walked into the meeting and I got up and not turning the lights on. I'd gone to the other room and had a shower, got my suit on, put my shoes on, left. Go into the meeting and I've got different colour shoes on, different colour socks on. But there's plenty of other stories like this. My business partner was an absolute larrikin. So no.
Shifting into your publican days,
Yeah.
Where do you see the impact of poker machines on the communities in which you're providing these venues where families can come and all that sort of stuff? Did you find that much of a struggle, or are you comfortable with where that's at? Like, obviously they're a huge revenue contributor.
Listen, they're not the magic wand that everyone says, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I was very much of that. We have a couple of pubs that don't have machines. I was very much of the view that we shouldn't, but then you realise that 99.5% who put money through pokies are not problem gamblers. And if you go in, they're mostly women, they don't drink. They come in, they're safe there, they know each other, we give them scones, they might put 20 or 50 bucks through the machine, they have dinner and go home. Even the guys don't drink in a gaming room, so they're not like sports bet people out punting on races, completely different group. There was a lady called, I think, Doris, and the guys were worried she was spending too much money, so I was up in the Tweed and I went and said, "Oh, Doris, the boys are a bit worried." She said, "Peter, I have nothing to do. My kids have all got houses, I've got plenty of money. I spend maybe $100 a week here." And she said, "If you want me to go somewhere else, I'll go somewhere else." Now, just to cover off the cost and where the money goes, does anyone know what a licence costs for a poker machine? Have a guess. I'd like someone to give me a guess.
100 grand.
So we're currently paying $600 to $750 for a licence. Per machine, and that's before you buy the machine, and that's before you buy the games, and it's before you pay the annual fee to the government. The government, So, if you're in a pub, we repay 93 cents on the dollar to the punters. The government gets 58% of that. If you're in a club, and we can have 30 machines. If you're in a club, you can have as many machines as you like. They get taxed at 8%. And so if you go to Bankstown Sports Club, there'd be 1,200 machines there. So I just think the government's not going to give it away because it's such a money generator for them. For the publicans, like we're getting 3.5 cents before we staff it, buy the machines, buy the games, pay the annual fees, fit the room out, which is usually $2 or $3 million to fit a room out. So we're making a good profit out of it. I don't deny that, but it is not rivers of gold in pubs. In clubs, it's rivers of gold. But in terms of who gets it and do I agree with it, people bet on horses. The big one is online at the moment. They bet on, I just think as long as it's legal, we'll do it, but it's not our focus. Our focus is on family-friendly hotels, and we have games as part of our offering, but we don't have... Some hotels you go into, all they do is gaming. We don't do that. We have kids' play areas, we have outdoor areas, we have beautiful restaurants. That answers the question.
Peter, fascinating to hear your story. Thanks for sharing. You seem to understand, or you were able to enter areas which originally you weren't involved in your business, and your business evolved. Where do you see the future? Where would you be investing now? What industries or areas would you think are the future?
Well, it wouldn't be in software development. So I think there's great businesses out there that you can invest in. I think we have to seriously have a look at what sort of businesses we want in this country, in terms of, do we want production businesses, do we want mining businesses? I think the big problem is people get involved in a business that have skinny margins and a lot of competition. You want to look at businesses that have nice margins and you can sideline your competition through intellectual property or offerings. So I don't want to give you any advice on where you could go. We invest in hotels, Ridges hotels. We've got 2 Ridges. We've got some pubs. We do commercial industrial real estate, so building factories. We don't do residential. We do some private lending, private credit, and we do some startups and investing in shares. But I think you need to be careful, but look at the businesses. My rule was always, how much business does the debt have? What's the management like? And what's the margin like?
What was like the game-changing moment for your business where it took you from a good business to a great business, do you think?
There were two things that really happened. We convinced retailers to go from 4 catalogues a year to 52. Now that's a game changer. We went from like 16 million catalogues for Coles a year to 210. And we did it to everybody, and we ended up putting out 5 billion catalogues a year. Second one was and this is an interesting one, we had a fair bit of the bank work, but we didn't have it all. And coming up to the Olympics from about 94 onwards, the Olympic people were out there, trying to do contracts and everything else, and we had a meeting. And through it, I said, guys, I think we should ignore the Olympics because it's a one-off. We need recurrent business every week in the door. So while all our opposition went around and won all the Olympic work, we locked up every bank in Australia. And by the time they got through the Olympics, they'd realised that, and some of it was technology. A major opposition was using laser printing by Xerox 9790s. We flew to Germany, to Siemens, went and saw the MD and said, you've got no market in Australia, zero. And we reckon we can get you more than 50%, but you're going to have to give us 2 machines for nothing. And they were $2 million each. And he gave them to us. And we came back and they were running at 30,000 pages a minute. So all of a sudden we had a cost pressure. And then we built the pipes into all the banks. So we actually built pipes to take data. They used to send us tapes. And they were always full of crap. They'd have accounting data on the end because they'd used it 8 times. And it was an absolute mess. So they finally gave us into the bank. So by the time they got out of it, we had pipes in. We're running at 30,000 pages a minute. We're putting, for CommBank, we're putting in 4 million packs a week out. So, technology. I don't know if that answers the question. Anything else?
Hello, Peter.
Yeah.
Over here.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Duncan.
Hi, Duncan.
My business is in financial advice and wealth management. So I guess my question to you is, you are managing your family wealth. What's the percentage you invest in Australia, and what's the percentage you invest overseas? And the second question is, because I know you're a business a leader and in the trenches and really doing the business, what's your advice offered to the Australian government? Because the Australian economy the structure of the economy is deteriorating. The complexity of the Australian economy that measures the diversity of the businesses is dropped down to 105th in the world, and the GDP per capita is dropping as well. What's your advice to the government, and how we can revitalize the local economy as a country? Thanks, Peter.
So I guess the first one was maybe 30% of our investments are offshore. The rest would be onshore. Spread across, we have spread, so we're not at risk from any particular sector. In terms of the Australian government, I have great belief in the Australian people. I think that the Australian people, when roused, make decisions. They're not roused yet because it hasn't really caused a problem and they're getting all this stuff given away for free. But, we are 105th in the world, and we've got a whole bunch of issues from power through to... I'll give you an instance. We building a new pub in Tweeds, cost about 25 million to build it. We got our DA approved 2 years ago, and we should normally, when you get a DA approved, 4 to 6 weeks later you get your BA, your building approval. We got our building approval in December, 2 years later. That is what's wrong. The way the government has got in and just made it so hard to do things, and this is... we lost our competitive edge. So I think what will happen is eventually the public will get sick of it because they can't afford groceries and they can't do what they wanted to do, and they vote them out. And then we'll go through another one. But right at the moment, our opposition parties are in a little bit of trouble. So I think we've got another 6 or 8 years of waiting. Any more questions before?
Hello. Thank you so much for the great story. So I run a small business back in Tokyo, and then my question is, how do you train your employee, because you have so much employee, and even despite my business is very small, I find it really difficult to deliver my message to all my employee. So everything you said, we have to work as a team and we have to trust employees, they build the service business, but I think my employees are starting to work just for money and not really putting their effort same level as me, and I understand that. But I want to know how I can motivate my employees to lead the success.
Yeah, so nearly all of our employees were on some sort of incentive scheme for performance, and they had very strict. My view of performance incentives is that at the end of the year, any employee should be able to say, "You owe me," rather than "It's my value judgment," because they'll always lose. If it's my value judgment, they'll always lose out. But you've got to get them in front of you. You've got to go through why it's important to do these things, and you've got to build a program that they've got to adhere to. But it's not easy. We had a business in Japan, and it's difficult when you're cross borders. Everyone thinks Asia's the same, but even in Philippines or Taiwan, there are different groups, different languages, and so you need to build your training programs that are multilingual, that appeal to their sense of culture, and then go and sit with them. You can't do it long distance, I'm sorry. Don't know if that helps, but that's what we did.
Thank you so much, Peter, for so generously sharing all this. So can I get a very big round of applause for Peter, please?